Monza this year. A lot of fast records. We've got the fastest average lap speed. I think it was that Max set that Lewis previously set a few years back. The fastest race ever, 1 hour and 13 minutes. Honestly, that time it flew by. And by the time I received the alarm on the phone, the test alarm that was going off at 3 p.m., Sainz and Behrman just spun, and it was nearly the end of the race. We were definitely past halfway. So, yeah, it was a very quick race. It was a very quick weekend, and we always expect that from Monza, don't we? But, this was a step up, I guess you could say. For the race, the first few laps were very electric. Oh, I love the battles, especially between Leclerc and Piastri, and then Leclerc and Russell, and Verstappen and Norris at the beginning. Norris getting his tyres dirty on the grass, Verstappen having to cut through, and then just a few laps later, after having to concede the position, he went back at Norris, and then we just never saw him again. Brought a 20-second gap out of I don't know where. It was the Max of old, the Max of 2023, 2024. It was, that was something else. Hamilton got up to P6, I believe. It would have been P6. And then Bortoletto scoring some points for Sauber in P7. Hadjar started from the pit lane, got P10. I'm not too sure he got P8 and 9 though. There was a lot of action with drivers battling into turn 4. We had Snowden, Lawson, we had Ocon and Stroll. They had some clashes there, but the most notable one is once again our main guy, Carlos Sainz and Ollie Behrman getting taken out. The letter of the law says it's Sainz's corner, Behrman penalty. Behrman now is on 10 points, so 2 points away from a race ban. We were talking about Verstappen getting a race ban not too long ago. Obviously, points have expired since. I think it's kind of like last weekend where Sainz tried to go around the outside of Lawson. I think it's an issue with the letter of the law. And we've just had these new driving standards regulations, and it's starting to make me wonder, how much of an influence did the Grand Prix Drivers Association have in that? Because if one of their directors is actively complaining about the driving standards and the precedent that it sets for racing, then it doesn't seem like they had much impact or had much say. Obviously, the FIA are looking at safety, but in the end, I think it needs to be between the drivers, the teams, the FOM, and Liberty Media and them, man, and then the FIA. Obviously, the FIA are gonna have final say. I don't know how the votes are structured, but they're more than likely going to have final say on what goes in the driving standards. But this is why we need former drivers, and I think we need to start getting more drivers from this era. Maybe a Grosjean's still racing, but drivers who are no longer racing but have spent some time, even in the hybrid era, maybe even a bit before that. We need the experience in these types of cars, or we need more involvement from the Grand Prix Drivers Association to prevent this. A driver's front axle should be fully ahead of the attacking driver's rear axle, so it should be front axle to rear axle for them to be considered alongside, which I believe Behrman was. Otherwise, you could be halfway alongside like Behrman, could be fully committed. I mean, is it his fault that he was fully committed, knowing what the rules were? You can make an argument for that, but I guess you're kind of expecting the other driver to give you the respect of racing room, and they can just slam the door like that and you get the penalty. But then also there's also another side to this, was did Science know he was on his inside? I don't think he did. And if he did, I don't think he was expecting him to commit to trying to go alongside, knowing what the regulations were. Again, I'm not sure. I'm throwing hypotheticals out there. But yeah, that personally doesn't work for me. Front axle to rear axle. Let's see some proper racing. Because right now we're going down a dangerous route where DRS on the straights is the only way we are going to have proper overtakes. The corners, it's just going to be drag racing at that point. You know how drag racing just has the really grippy drag strip? They try and go as fast as possible on the straights. It is just going to be that, because you're not allowed to overtake in the corners. That's the precedent that they're setting. Last weekend was Sainz trying to go around the outside of Lawson. Here, Behrman trying to go up the inside of Sainz. They were both a significant, according to, my front axle to rear axle, they were both a significant, length alongside the other driver. And I feel like that just gives the other driver too much the defending driver too much power, and they can just drive the other driver off the road. Maybe not blatantly or so, in black and white, but they can just argue, I was taking the racing line, or maybe I had a snap of oversteer or something like that, and they can just say, either way, it's my corner, he's not supposed to be there, the other guy gets the penalty, or it's your problem, or something like that. Yeah, it doesn't work. Alright, going on to Pirelli's 500th race. The mediums were the ones to be on. They comfortably went 40 laps. They probably could have done the entire race if that was an option. Obviously, it's not an option. Then some like the McLarens could put on the softs on mid-40s. The softs obviously deteriorated a lot more than the mediums. But in my opinion, a definite one stop on mediums to hards is boring enough. Mediums to softs is not good for anyone. Everyone's on the same strategy. Apart from a couple of laps of tire offset, you're not getting any variation in strategy. Unless you chuck on the wets and hope for the best. Like, come on. Pirelli, do what you did last weekend. Make it C3, C4, C6. Something like that. Skip a step. Or, now that you've set that precedent, maybe go C2, C4, C6. Really define that difference in performance in the tyres. McLaren, oh my days. McLaren, they strike again with their fairness, one for all and all for one. Mate, both of your drivers are in the championship title. Yeah, it's not going to be pretty. One of them's going to lift the drivers' championship. The other one is going to be standing there at the FIA prize giving, clapping. Yeah, evidently disappointed. You're not going to make everyone happy. And I know they want to make this fair. And I know when they want to make this, all nice. Yeah, they don't want a repeat of 2016 or, 2021, but inter-team. They don't want any of those title fights. They want to keep it civil. When has a title fight been civil? Like, come on. Alright, let's talk about that. That's for after. Let's set the scene. Norris, so he gets the call talking about when talking to box with his engineer, and then he asks if they want to box the other driver first, obviously referring to Piastri, in order to cover Leclerc. So that was considerate of him. Piastri had a 1.9 second pit stop, fastest pit stop of the season actually. So should be the same for Norris, right? A lap later, it wasn't the same for Norris, and actually on the day, I did predict that something like this was going to happen. Norris was going to be courteous enough to give away his first choice, his first pit stop, and then he'd end up with the short end of the stick. So the very next lap, Norris had a 5-point-something second pit stop. The front left wheel nut, whatever went wrong. Ended up with him behind Piastri because there was about a 3-second gap. There was no risk of undercut. Right. Had everything gone right, there was no risk of undercut. And then the inevitable question was asked: would Piastri need to give the position back? Unfortunately, McLaren thought so, and they were free to race for the last 5 laps. But Piastri got about 1 lap of DRS, but never really came close to overtaking him. And had it been vice versa, I don't think Norris is catching Piastri. So there are 2 sides to this. Piastri has already come out saying that he's fine with the entire situation. But I think it is important for us to discuss these things, because this is the type of stuff that could define a team's entire season. So, from Norris's side, in his own words, he earned the right to be ahead. And with that knowledge and no possibility of an undercut, he complied with the team's request by allowing Piastri to box ahead of him. And that wouldn't have affected him if not for the bad pit stop. He also didn't say anything on the team radio after the pit stop. So this was a McLaren-driven decision to swap cars. Now, when Piastri got that request, himself and a lot of others in the moment and after the fact were probably asking, is that not part of racing? And you know what? We'll talk about this later. Is that not a part of racing? Well, it's up to the team, right? You know, whether they consider that. And Max, on the way he was on the team radio, you know, was kind of like, yeah, that's not happening to me. He was laughing. He was laughing when GP told him that. And he actually said in an interview today, he would not give that position back if he was him in that situation. And I think he has been in that situation before. Brazil, I forget which year. It's definitely not 23. Definitely not 24. 22? It might have been 22. Russell's first win, where they wanted to swap. Was it to swap Checo and Max? Something like that. And Max just was not having any of it. He just was not. So yeah. Although he didn't have the full story, I think Max had all the information that he got, that he needed to get. But yeah. Like I said, I'm all for a fair fight. I understand them wanting to cover off Leclerc. But the way I see it, their initial plan was for Oscar to box, Lando to box, and that's it. Lando stayed out with the assurance that no undercut was going to happen. It was not going to, had they had the exact same pit stop, Piastri stays behind Norris. Even if Norris has a second longer pit stop, so 2.9 seconds, which is around the average, maybe a bit above average. Okay, it's acceptable. Yeah. The only reason it didn't work was because of a team error, which according to Oscar in their meetings, defined it as part of racing. Bad pit stops are a part of racing. That shouldn't be on Oscar. Hopefully they can talk about this and clarify. because this will cause conflict later down the line, whether it's this year or next year, where they're not just going to be competing with themselves, but they're going to be competing with the Aston Martins. They're going to be competing with the Ferraris, the Mercedes, the Red Bulls, maybe even teams like the Williamses, the Haases, maybe even Cadillac, maybe Checo and Bottas turn up on day one, yeah, with the 2026 version of a double diffuser and absolutely blitz the field. Yeah, maybe that happens. We don't know. So if they cannot get their priorities straight now as to what do we do in this situation, what do we do in that situation, then I worry for them.